Okay, good evening and welcome to a special meeting of the Community Development Committee. And this is for the purpose of doing our comprehensive planning. And we'll do roll. Julie?
Scott Counter.
Present.
Dan Hansen.
Here.
Ryan Shirley.
Present.
Jerry Van Someren.
Present.
And Sean Anderson is excused.
And we'll turn this meeting over to our staff. Ellen, take it away.
Thank you very much. So I think we all got introduced last time. We can do that real quickly. Just staff can say their names for anybody who doesn't know everybody. But Julie will start in your corner, so this is kind of work around.
Julie Peterson, Community Development.
Nicole Peterson, Community Development.
Ellen Denzer, Community Development.
Brett Budrow, Community Development.
John Hilgers, Community Development.
Okay. So next, we're going to turn to John for just a very brief answer a question or clarify something that from last meeting that he wanted to make sure you guys understood.
So this will take one moment. We talked briefly about solar energy facilities, and we talked about utility aid payments in lieu of taxes. And I just wanted to make sure you got the right information because I think I may have understated some of the impacts. So in Wisconsin, owners of solar farms greater than 50 megawatts are exempt from local property tax. So the state established a revenue sharing formula under number 2. So a qualifying solar farm will contribute $4,000 per megawatt per year. And the way it breaks out under state rule is $23.33 per megawatt will go to the county, $16.67 per megawatt to the township hosting the project. And under number 3, for example, a 100 megawatt solar farm, which we have 2 in the approval process, would provide approximately $233,000 annually to the host county and $167,000 per year to the host township. And most of the solar leases are for 30 to 35 years, so multiply that out and you can do the math. Although this land will no longer pay property taxes, the net gain in utility aid payments will be estimated to be 10 to 15 times higher than the lost property taxes. And in some cases, it'll be more than that. So I just wanted to clarify that because I think in the prior meeting, I understated that a little bit. So, information item.
Any questions on that? Yeah.
It's interesting in the past couple of weeks, the resolutions that have come to the supervisors about this very thing and about the different counties that are not pleased that the state makes the decisions when it comes to the 50 plus, and that there are resolutions to do away with that. So. That could change.
It's actually 100 plus that they make the decision. So in the county, you cannot, unless there is a direct threat to health, safety, or welfare that is identified through the approval process, you can't deny them in this state, but you can regulate them. But if there is a direct threat. Now, and when John said there's 2 underway, one of them is, I believe, was at the Public Service Commission, and he's either close to being done or done, and the other was approved by the County Board of Adjustment, and they did delay construction for a year. I forget exactly what the reasoning was, but it should be under construction this year and next and be open for business, and they don't pay it until the year that they start producing energy. That's the way to say it. So. Yep. Okay. So with that, there were a couple other items you guys asked about. We actually did not have time to get to those at the last meeting, and we also talked about it and felt that like some of the questions on conservation design and things that would actually take a longer discussion, and we didn't want to run out of time tonight, and we actually have 2 agenda items. So in addition to the workshop on the plan, we also have another item that you guys asked for. So again, even though we didn't have time to get to them, we felt like that's probably okay. We'll bring them up at another time. And some of it may get answered tonight. So last meeting, excuse me, you were given blank copies of the goals, objectives, and policies from the 2008-2012 Comprehensive Plan with the request that you read through them and be prepared to provide us with comments, questions, and suggested changes. And staff, to help it along, also went through them, and Nicole, myself, John, and Brett, and we went through them and we marked them up and put those in the packet for you, and we've handed out those to you tonight already. So I'm going to just kind of start with them, and please feel free. I'm going to also ask. I thought I'd do them in, groups, kind of jump. I don't want to read through every single one. That would be a waste of all our time. But I thought I would start with them in kind of groups. Ask you guys for your feedback, your suggestions, and then kind of move into our suggestions. So with that, okay. So the first one we're going to do is land use. And we're doing them in this order: land use, natural resources, and then ag resources. We are going to postpone transportation until after the Transportation Committee weighs in. Okay? So the first group is goal number 1, land use, protect the rural character of St. Croix County. And as we know from the survey results, that is a very high priority for the citizens in our county. Basically, it talks, we suggest leaving most of these, but editing a couple of them. And we also realized that one of them, 1.3, was already been done. So, thoughts that any of you guys have? Okay, no problem. Goal 1, we suggested the word promote conservation design based on our discussion last month. Maintain and promote the viability of agriculture. That one was already there. It kind of tried to, we're not quite sure why it did that. But varying the density is something that we've already done with our new zoning ordinance. And the other one, the encouraging conservation design, was already stated up above, as we've mentioned. No change, and property values. We just made a little clearer what was the purpose of it. I just whipped through goal objectives 1.1 through 1.6 real quick. Do you have the track changes one?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Scott, you got some comments?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, the first one we're talking about here is on the conservation design, and yes, I'm a strong advocate of conservation design and what we need, but one of the things that I just wanted to bring to the table that I see as an issue, and I don't know if we need to think about these things for addressing, but the biggest thing that I think has been a hindrance for this has been wastewater management issues, and part of the deal is how to administrate it. So do we look at it as a municipal or a private public-private partnerships? And because with this, we have to look at the mechanics for collection. We have to look at the mechanics for the administration. So then you're creating things like a sinking fund and the actual operations of the system and the reporting. There's state reporting involved. And then what about default of members? So if somebody defaults, as a private owner of a system, on the default issues, it becomes very cost prohibitive if they're going to try to go after a single individual, because it means going to court, and they don't have the methods like the government does to say, hey, you didn't pay your utility bill, you're in the city, you have a special assessment on your taxes. A private party can't do an assessment. So they have to go through a lot of things to try to collect that money, and if you have a whole bunch failing, that can put that company in jeopardy, whether they can maintain operations of that system. So why I'm saying all this stuff is I think we need to look at the mechanics and how to create this so that there becomes either a public-private partnership or these things are owned by a municipality, one or the other, so that the mechanics are there to be able to make this thing function and not go under. To leave it to a homeowners association for those types of things, I think is really going to be hard, because all of a sudden then you're telling all the neighbors, well, your neighbors haven't paid their sewer bills, X, Y, and Z, so you got to pay all their sewer bills on top of your sewer bills. And those types of things, it's going to really, I think, turn out negatively. So if we're going to do something like that, I really think this is the way to go, but I think we need to make this happen in a way that we can promote this to get both municipal cooperation, especially if we're looking private-public partners, or have it so that the local municipalities can take over. Because the other advantage here is if the municipalities have it, then they have the ability to, compared to individual septic systems, they have the ability to detect contamination violators. If somebody's got a meth lab or something, this stuff they know almost immediately, because these systems have to be monitored continuously. It's not like a private system that you really don't even know about it until the offending person is arrested and they've contaminated 5 people's wells with chemicals and groundwater contamination. So that, so there's a positive. You got centralized, so when you have centralized, you don't have all these individual people that have to have cards down at the county that have reports going out and asking for every individual. You might have a system with 30 of them, and so you have one that's covering everybody. You have the ability for the municipal systems, if it's close to municipality, that they can decrease their particulate increases that would normally be coming into their wastewater treatment facility, therefore giving more ability for the wastewater treatment plants to cover more the industrial and the commercial side, and the residential is being taken up by these separate systems, cuts down particulates. So there's a lot of positives. The biggest disadvantage, again, that we need to work out is for non-payers, and how it's going to be collected, and whether it's by homeowners association, municipalities, or individuals. So that's the whole thing I got on it.
Okay.
Sorry.
And that's probably a way more detailed request than what we want in goals, objectives, and policies. So appreciate all the thoughts, and I do know that a lot of what you just said is already in the existing conservation design. It
Okay.
can be any one of those 3, homeowners, public, private, all those routes. And towns could take it over or manage it, but frankly, most of them don't want to. And counties can't put things on the tax roll.
Right.
So
They can,
that's why
yeah.
the county, and also being in that business, probably big questions there. Big questions about at what point, how many would there have to be before it would be cost effective to have full-time operators. So all very good points, good questions. Probably want a copy of all those notes you wrote so we can read them over and make sure that we can have a good discussion. But it kind of goes back to the other questions that were brought up last meeting about conservation design that suggests we need a meeting just on that. Okay?
Sounds good, yeah. And the biggest thing is just, it's going to be educating the municipalities so they understand these advantages. I think would be a real big deal
Okay.
for the future.
Yeah, and it is, and it isn't a stagnant industry either by any means. Things are changing. So that would be a question of who's got the ability to stay ahead of all that to educate. So, Jerry, yeah.
Not a question, but a comment. So we have one of these, St. Croix Electric is part of that. That was one of my projects. that were there. And we looked at it, we probably, because we were maybe too much electric co-op, but we had a valve put in every sewer. So if they did not pay, we shut the valve off. Just like, in fact, that's more so than a municipality can do. So when you flush the toilet, it comes back up. And you know, when it comes back at you, people respond quite quickly.
Yeah.
And that was a locked off kind of thing. So that worked for that. You know, that, yes, there's a way around it, right? Mhm.
Right.
So St. Croix does manage the one in Hammond then?
Well, we did when I left
did?
there. I'm
Okay.
not sure what's
Okay.
happening now, but we did.
Got it,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I think all of those comments, these comprehensive plans have implementation items or an implementation section, and I think all of those comments and suggestions are good place to put them is in the implementation item for staff to do more research, promotion, or if there are any needed changes in our other ordinances, land division or zoning.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if we'd be able to turn it off, you know. Or I should say us, but a municipality. Probably that's a private sector ability.
Possibly so, yeah, and that worked well, you know, so that's the kind of partner I think you have to look for, someone that can do that.
Yes,
Because you know that's gonna happen.
right. And there's also, I think, a really other important factor is size. Even the one we have, the one conservation design, the homeowners are taking care of it now, and their developer was involved, but then changed hands numerous times. But you still have to ask yourself, well, if they had some of what you pointed out, that really requires, if not a full-time staff, it requires a professional firm hired to periodically, on a very regular basis, check on it. And at what point is it cost-effective? And I couldn't possibly tell you that, because I'm not involved in that kind of analysis, but a company like St. Croix Electric, and I mean, I'll be honest that, you know, St. Croix Electric was appealed to at that time very strongly, and they did not agree to take that one over, so.
Like I said, things have changed since I left there. But
Absolutely.
yeah, you know, it could work out very well without an awful lot of vision. I mean, it's just like any other utility. You know, and the good thing is, so we had hired a professional also who monitored the water, tested the water, pumped the tanks, all of that. You know,
Yeah.
so, you know, he worked well with us, but again, as you said, Ellen, things change hands and then
Things change hands,
then that makes it difficult.
and
yeah.
also not just change hands, but technology
It does.
changes, and I don't know, I mean, personally, it sounds like they wouldn't, it's just your basic version of a septic system, but the monitoring that's required, all that technology is a whole different era, so. I don't have any answers yet, but we'll help you to try to find them as soon as we can, so. Okay, with other questions on that first goal, on land use, on that, and the objectives under it. Okay, goal 2, balance land use regulation and individual property rights with community interests. Other than finding a typo on 2.3, we didn't have any suggested changes to that. Did any of you want to suggest some changes to that? Goal 2, land use, so we're going to stay in land use for the most part. Goal 2, objectives 2.1 through 2.3. Nope, it's on,
I'm sorry, that's one I have to, but if we're not there yet, it's just that mine's all mixed all over the place.
oh, okay, well, across the top, you should go back to the land use one and just stick with that. We're on the very first page. Start with goal 1, goal 2. Did you perhaps get, no, that's natural resources. This is land use. And let's see if
I'm
that-
sorry.
No problem. Agriculture, and here's land use. Goal 1. Start-
Backside.
Hang on to these two and don't go to the other pages for a little while, okay?
Better shape, thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely.
Okay, so this becomes more abstract than what we have listed here, but I had a conversation with Tim Ramberg on my way here, and we talked about whether or not there should be a vehicle for letting neighbors know, and this came up in our next agenda item, letting neighbors know if there's going to be a significant change, possible zoning in the neighborhood or the area where they live in close proximity. Would this fit into this category? Is this something that we could discuss? So,
There already is mechanisms, you know, we send out when there's a rezoning up to a certain distance, and we already do that for anything with Board of Adjustment, so those mechanisms are in place already.
so what type, if there's a potential rezoning, if there's a, at what level, so when people come and they say, we didn't know about this, how do we avoid that? So we had a room full of people who all claimed they didn't know anything about a zoning application. We don't make people aware if there's a zoning application, do we? There's not.
Yes, we do. When we send the public hearing notices out, people are notified, I want to say 300 feet. Yes, so 300 feet from the subject property, they're notified. And if they touch it just on a point where it comes to a corner, they're picked up. We don't go further than that. We actually go further than a lot of other places do. You technically don't even have to do that. So, but we always have, that goes way, way back, and we notify people. So if they didn't get, so if they said they didn't get notified, then if they live further out, then they might not have, but it's also in the papers, and it's on our website, and it's on our minutes and agendas page, so it's where we do what we can. You're never going to get everybody. No matter what you do, you will always have someone come to just about anything you adopt at some point, if it's a really big deal, and say, I never heard anything about it. No matter how many meetings we have, and we have, for various things over the years, we have done dozens of meetings, special interest groups, all that kind of thing, and inevitably someone shows up the day you're adopting it and says, I never heard anything about this, you have to stop the whole process because of me. Yeah, I mean, and then you always can stop the process if you want, that's not, but you can, but I'm just, you know, it's always up to the elected officials. So keeping going, goal 3, guide and manage development patterns that will preserve farmland and protect and enhance St. Croix County's natural resources. So these, we only made a couple of small changes. They do go on to the next page, and again, there's a few minor adjustments. We did suggest adding the word natural resources and agriculture. Suitable physical conditions exist, because that's usually where what people are wondering about on the next page. 3.4, you'll see numerous times where we wrote continue. These are things that we've already done, but sometimes we felt we should delete them because we've already done it and we need to move on. Sometimes we suggested it's something that's an ongoing process. So that was why 3.4 says continue. The new St. Croix River crossing, we debated that one and almost deleted it, but decided to bring it back to keep it, and took out the reference to the new river, the new bridge, and just the St. Croix River watershed, which covers about over 2/3 of St. Croix County, and we'll get the exact number in there. Brett was going to do that for us, but he happened to go on vacation the day we talked about this, so we didn't get that number in yet, but we will. And but that's how we thought it should read. And then we did want to strike 3.7. That was a very specific project associated with the St. Croix River crossing, and it went very, very well, but it is closed and out of money and funding. So, any thoughts on those?
I'm wondering if in 3.3 we could say something like, locate industrial and commercial development only where suitable physical conditions exist? Because the way the language says now, it implies that we're going to locate industrial and commercial development where suitable physical conditions exist, but we're going to allow it only where.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
I think I understand what you're saying. Yep. All right. And we can always come back to these. Remember, you're not adopting them today. You're not done today. What you're doing today is giving us direction and ideas, and these will come back to you again, and then they'll be after that they'll come back as a public hearing document, and then they'll finally go to finally get adopted. So, policies. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
With that one, the same one that Dan was talking about here, I'm just going to use a for instance. So in an instant like that, we'll say there used to be a company in St. Croix County located in the very northeast corner called Fisher Scientific. And there was a pretty big facility, and their operation was to raise different types of little critters, especially bullfrogs and different things that were sold to classrooms for dissecting and all that. With something like this being in the rural, that was like ultra rural where that was. It was like this modern place was all of a sudden in the middle of nowhere. Would this in any way restrict something like that, if a business like that where they want to incorporate in the rural type be a bad option, or would this be negative towards them?
Yes and no. If you recall from last month's survey results, one of the questions that was asked and has been asked, was asked in 2008, was where does the public want to see commercial and industrial development? And they don't want to see very much industrial at all in the rural areas, and they strongly want to see commercial industrial only in those areas that were that have been in our comprehensive plans since about 2000, which is major highways and corridor and intersections and that kind of place. They don't want commercial and industrial out in the middle of nowhere. And the exception would be things that are closely related to agriculture. And that is very strongly allowed for in the 2 ag districts, the farmland preservation districts, and that comes to us through state law, which we'll be talking about later. So that, I don't know if this Fisher Scientific would have fit as an ag-related with the frogs, but possibly not. And so, but that is what the public wants. Yeah, so, yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering if we don't want to put something in in the land use somewhere about cooperating with the local villages and towns, because we don't have the map up here tonight, but we had the one where all the ones that don't have major subdivisions,
All the communities,
all
right?
the communities
Right.
that don't allow it. If we shouldn't have, I mean, if we're looking at that opinion survey that 71% want less rural land use, well, our local communities are already trying to do that. Should we find a way to word that in there, saying that we're not cooperating, cooperate maybe not the right word, but working with them to keep their development the way that they want in their local area.
To respect the autonomy of the villages?
Right.
And we do have to do that regardless, and we do, perhaps the one that's, we'll keep going here, but on the next page, there's one that says guide and manage development patterns. And so that would be a good category area, perhaps.
Yeah.
And this one is related to it. Most of the goals and objectives will have a related set of policies. So we can certainly add that here in these, and we can work on some wording that, I think what you're saying is like something along the lines of support municipal plans and for growth and development.
Yeah.
And just so you know, you're going to get, I don't disagree with that at all, but the pushback is always that the towns would rather not have annexations. And that's basically what you're talking about, is that for cities to grow, they have to annex. And the local townships would rather not see any annexations. Okay, I don't have any, you'd have to respond to that, not me.
Yeah, it is.
Except on the other hand, Ryan's right. I mean, that is the traditional historic way that communities have grown, and it's expected. you have communities that, when you look at the physical size, New Richmond, as big as it is nothing compared to the size of the 4 towns around it. That doesn't mean that there isn't some conflicts, there isn't some interaction, but it's also true that development patterns that cause a problem for those communities to keep growing have happened in the past. And it is more compact, contiguous development will be better from a standpoint of roads, services, schools, taxes.
Water resources.
Protects water resources, protects agriculture, all those kind of things. So it's a really big issue, and we can certainly try to craft something that you guys would be satisfied with.
Well, I was just going to suggest
Yeah, good.
possibly on the policy part of guide and manage development patterns 3.6. Maybe we were thinking along the same lines, collaborate with other jurisdictions on common land use and planning issues.
It's a new one we just added at the very end.
Yeah.
Or we can add to it or something if you,
And I think we can add something, a policy that supports it also, because local municipalities usually have plans that show them growing outside their existing boundaries. I'm thinking that the one we were just on, the 3.7, we deleted, we would replace it with something related specifically to what Ryan has brought up.
Cooperate with local communities to respect the adopted municipal plans and guide coordinated development throughout the county.
We can work on that. We don't have to solve it tonight, but yeah, that concept. Yep. Okay, so, next, and like I said, I'm sure Scott could speak to, there will be some pushback. But that's up to you guys, it's a policy.
We're still talking about policy, right?
No, we haven't gotten to policies, we just finished with objectives, and now there's policies to get us into it. That's all right. Rural character, I'm just gonna keep us moving, because otherwise we'll be scheduling another meeting. So, we had very few changes. You will see right there, one of the things Scott brought up, the very first one, 1.1 under rural character, encourage conservation site design subdivisions that retain at least 45 to 65. It was 65, but I will tell you that when we actually wrote the regulations, we had dropped it to 50 to 60, and now we suggested dropping it another 5% in permanent open space. So,
I think that is pretty squishy in terms of what we're recommending for a developer. It's not specific what we're recommending, what we're encouraging. It says we're encouraging, but we're not saying, we're not giving specific guidelines as to what we're encouraging. It's a very wide range. It's a very big moving target as to what we're encouraging.
well, that isn't how it would work out, and it already did work out in our actual ordinances. Our ordinances, like, we have one process that was at 65%, and we have another process that was at 50. And we're basically saying either of those could be adjusted even more, but as a policy, I think we thought it would be better to have this broader range until you kind of work out more of what direction. And there are different situations. Developments can range a lot in size. The most typical in St. Croix County is on 40 to 80 acres. And one of the things we've been talking about as staff is that we're not sure that that's really big enough to justify. There isn't really more expense, there should be less expense, but maybe it's not enough to justify the risk of changing what Scott said last time, which is developers want to do what they know, what's easy, what's familiar. And to take a chance on something a little different, they maybe need a greater incentive. And at the same time, that 40 to 80 acres, which is what's traditionally developed in the rural areas, there's a lot of terrain in the county, and very few places are going to be a flat farm field where you could get the absolute maximum number of lots. But all those are factors that would play into this final decisions in specific land use ordinances.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I think as a range, it's probably okay, and it's the devil's in the details, like usual, but this gives us a direction. Next couple, any suggestions to any of them? As you can see, number 1.5 was another continue to have and update as needed the standards, which is one of the next things. And the standards are found in multiple ordinances, as mentioned here. Zoning, land division, sanitary, and stormwater all have specific standards just for conservation design. And then we made it a little stronger, promote protection, expansion of outdoor recreation and off-road trail. It's going back to what we saw in the public opinion survey, that people are very supportive of those. Any thoughts on any of those? Okay, land use regulations, that next section. A lot of them are things that we've accomplished in the past 10, 12 years. Updating the zoning, that's done. The ag districts, that's done. Additional changes that help towns evaluate their needs are all done. Next page, we had incentives to encourage existing areas to accommodate new development. A lot of that's been done. If there's something that you think we should put it back in because there's a specific idea you have, that's great, but some of these things have been accomplished. Keeping going, old 2.5, now it's red, it's 2.1. The feasibility study regarding transfer of development rights. We support that, and we want to keep supporting it because we have one town that does it, and there may be more, but at the concept of it at a county-wide basis, we just could not get any towns that were interested in doing it on a county-wide basis, or more importantly, any cities. So that one did not move forward, and we don't think we should redo that. We also had, go ahead. Yep, go ahead. No, that's what we want you to do.
That's the next one that
Okay, yep. So
on,
this one there.
yep, transfer of development rights. I was fortunate enough about 12, 15 years ago, I went out with Neil Nissel-Stroon. I always abort his name, but he was the Secretary of Agriculture for Wisconsin, along with a whole bunch of professors from Wisconsin, out east to tour and look at how they do transfer development rights. And part of the deal with the transfer of development rights that have concerns on a county basis, I know we do have them in Troy Township. Even with Troy, talking with one of the local builders, they said that per lot in Troy Township, that added about 15 years ago, or whenever they started, it would added about $25,000 a lot to the cost of a lot in Troy Township at that time, to purchase development rights. The thing that I have concerns on Troy's system that I just don't know, okay, is the mechanics of how they're doing it and how they administer it. Because when you purchase development rights, you know, you have the purchaser and the seller, and you're looking at how is it set up for as far as, you know, normally when you go out east, they have what's called a transfer of development rights banks and exchanges. They have to have very specific policy and administration and how this works so that because this can all be held accountable for in the future. And as they're doing this, if these development rights have been purchased and they haven't been applied to a property yet, who's holding those, you know, how is that being documented that they have these rights that are in limbo because somebody already has a deed restriction, they've been paid, and somebody else supposedly has it, but there's no Wisconsin tangible document that says, oh, this is a development right. So, you know, how is their policies, how are they monitoring and taking care of this? These are things that they worked out east, but it took a lot. And one of the things that they talked about is if we were to look at this as a county and to deal with the administration of this, is the cost, because they said that on and I have a report on this that actually identifies all this from, it was done by the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization from the World Bank Advisory Services and Analytics Project. And they talked about this in great detail. It's like a 53-page document. And they said that on average out east, before they had development rights, that their cost for even land rentals and stuff were over 30% less than after the development rights projects started going in and be put into place, because it offset the cost of housing so much that it made the demand for the rentals then go up, so that made the price of the rent and everything else went up with it. So and then the other thing was that they had to have taxes in order to administer everything, because now all of a sudden they're starting a whole nother layer of government that has to do with administration and all of the different little components that go together to make this work properly. So this report basically said, although there's a lot of positive characteristics that come from transfer of development rights, it comes at a pretty good cost that has to be borne on the taxpayers, as it isn't free. In other words, you know, they make it sound that way because they say, well, somebody else is paying for them, but the problem is it's the administration and making sure that nobody's being cheated and all of the other parts of it.
So you're saying you'd like us to delete it completely?
I'd like to, not necessary, because we have it already. We have a township that has it.
Yep.
So I think deleting it would not be prudent, but I think we need to not necessarily promote more unless we have the mechanisms and we can sell it. Because, you know, for me to come to the county board as a county board member and say, hey, we need to increase taxes for this new program, I don't think it would go over really well, because we have so many things that are stressing us already with the budget we already have.
Well, we were, as staff, we were in complete agreement with what everything you already said, except we didn't know any specific numbers, but that's why we just said support, because we do need to have a provision in our ordinances that allows Troy to do it.
Yep.
And so that's why it says, we'll just continue, we'll support it. But we took out everything about studying it or creating it.
Yeah,
So is that what you wanted?
that's kind of, yeah, I
Okay.
just think we're going down a channel otherwise if we're gonna try to pursue it.
No,
Countywide.
we're at the point where we were not recommending we pursue it. Go ahead.
Just add the word existing. The county will support existing transfer of development rights programs.
And we can do that, but
I kind of wonder about the word support. I'm looking at Dane County actually supports it. It looks expensive. I'm wondering if maybe we could just say we allow it, not support it. Because the word support suggests there's an active component to what our management is.
okay. And I think that technically it's not our decision whether they do it or not. Allow sounds like we have control.
Oh, yeah, that's probably not the word.
So let us work on a different word than support, and we'll come back to it next month. So,
Okay, thanks.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so there is some review. We do know that we would like to do some changes to our non-metallic mining ordinance, and so we've identified them in 2.3. That's another one of our list of projects we want to do. We took out the one about reviewing our regulations for small-scale and large-scale alternative energy. Not needed anymore, that we have it in our new zoning ordinance, and it addresses it exactly the way the state requires us to. Land use we want to continue to evaluate any land use regulations in response to changing land uses. And that happens all the time, but we are always trying to stay ahead of any statutory changes, and that's a challenge. So we just put that in there. The next one, guide and manage development patterns. No change, very few changes. Again, we wanted to reference major subdivisions because that's where we see most of the problem, not with the isolated minors. And we also see the major subdivisions as, when it comes to conflicts with these other uses, as the reason for looking at that is to separate the protection of groundwater. So, next, 3.4, again, St. Croix River crossing, and with 3.5, we struck or updated that to reflect what was done and what will continue to be done. And then 3.6, the collaborate with other jurisdictions on common land use and planning issues. And we might even make that collaborate with jurisdictions on, and maybe we'll say city, village, town instead of just jurisdictions, kind of make it a little more clear. And we can also suggest perhaps something relating to their town, their common land use and comprehensive plans, because that's really what we want to do, and that's usually where they would identify their growth. Okay? So, a couple changes. Sure.
Do we define terms someplace, major subdivisions and,
They're all
I'm-
defined in our ordinances, yes.
okay, so, and then when we say protect groundwater, I know we talk about groundwater a lot. We say protect groundwater. We have a pretty specific meaning of protect groundwater.
Yeah, I think the other night when, the last Thursday's committee meeting, when Tim put that up on the screen, and one of the things he showed you guys was there's pure water, and then there's acceptable standards, and then you have over the acceptable standards. That would be the groundwater quality relates to the state of Wisconsin's identified standards. And they can't really be much and different than that.
I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so that would, land use, go ahead.
I'm in a, that protection of groundwater is a really huge thing to me too on this stuff. But the thing that I look at with that is, and maybe it's in another, going to be in another section, but one of the concerns is, do we do anything with subterranean stats that would say that these particular areas are higher karst areas or places where we can get infiltration of contaminants down to water tables way faster than in another area? And then do we look at those things in development and say, hey, we really don't want a major chemical plant where we're going to have an area that could have real quick contamination for water tables, and especially where do the municipalities look at their expansion for where they're looking at potential future well sites, and how do we look at that to protect so that these are all brought into the planning process and we kind of think these through a little bit so we don't end up in the future with some potential disasters.
Well, so when this was originally written, protection of groundwater wasn't specifically identified, other than we were moving for multiple reasons toward having, instead of a 1 acre minimum lot size, we had moved way back in 2006 to a 2 acre average, 1.5 acre minimum. And we've continued to do that, and that's one tool to protect groundwater. What you said about the karst topography or other sensitive areas, we definitely could start to have those kinds of standards and regulations. I don't believe there is anything. Our natural resources section, we have our resources team, natural resources team, looking at those, and they've got some suggestions that we have put in here. We could certainly come up with some additional standards and thoughts. The reality is that there are definitely areas of the county that are more susceptible than others. We could identify those. Some of the best ways that some of the municipalities are doing is wellhead protection ordinances, which they have the authority to do. The more they would do that, even identify future well locations and put in wellhead protection ordinances for that, would prevent that conflict you're talking about. Not having very much industrial or commercial other than in those nodes and those freeways, highway commercial, node commercial, major highway commercial, and those are also great tools. One of the things that the county could look at would be, well, what is there for those uses? What have we got in terms of an approach, perhaps I don't know if we have the authority to do that, but a wellhead protection ordinance of some kind. But again, those are usually for the deeper wells. One of the other things is agricultural use and the runoff that comes from agriculture. We work very hard on trying to educate farmers. We have a whole division that does that. We have a lot that we try to do. It's a tough one, very tough one. Some of the other things you mentioned about separating uses, the other concern that a lot of our staff bring up is the sheer volume of rural residential development and what that could do to groundwater. You'd have to really think about that, because that would definitely be a direction that would come from your elected officials, that, you know, do we want to continue to see the sheer volume of rural residential development, the sheer number of wells, the sheer number of sanitary systems on our soils here? And in some cases, we're not too worried because we have a lot even better technology, and we are very good in this county. And when we put sanitary systems in, we're very persistent, careful, follow-up, training, everything. Inspections, we are very thorough. However, we also put in a whole lot more of them than most counties in this state. So we have to be that way. And again, you're talking, karst topography tends to run in a big circle around the outer edges of our county. So Star Prairie, Somerset, St. Joe, Hudson, Troy, Stanton, Ceylon, Forest, Glenwood, Springfield. That's where it tends to be. We also have other issues with all the heavy clay soils in O'Galley, Baldwin, Katy, parts of Emerald and Hammond. And then we have beautiful soils in the middle, but there's a lot of local regulation that impacts it. These are important ideas, but you'd be changing a lot of the direction that's happened historically. So I don't know if there's support for that. You guys would have to tell us.
I think education is part of it.
Yep, and we are doing a lot of that. We are going out with those water quality education, test your water, let's find out where we're at. We
Municipalities is a big one that needs to be educated on, understanding the importance of wellhead protection, understanding the
Okay.
importance of, you know, all of these different things, because they, you know, they do have planning committees, but a lot of times they don't talk to each other. The water department doesn't necessarily tell the city council. They'll tell them if there's a problem. They don't tell them, hey, you know, if you're thinking about this for the future, maybe you should consider this. That part of the education, I think, might be to help us, help
Okay.
everybody.
So the water quality study happened since the last comprehensive plan was written. Can we incorporate the goals from the water quality study into this plan?
Absolutely. We'd probably do it in the natural resources section, but anything that applies in land use, we can add. Okay.
And I'll also say, Nicole has been working in the utility community facilities section of the plan, addressing wellhead protection and wells too. So many of these items overlap into different sections of the comprehensive plan.
And we should probably keep going and see where that happens.
Sorry, I keep getting in the weeds.
But it's good. I mean, we're hearing thoughts and ideas that you guys have, and that's what we want to know. I think I was done with land use, right? Yeah. I think I said that. Okay, natural resources. Natural resources, interesting enough, has one goal. And that it's like that. I kind of read through the whole thing and thought about it and thought, well, you could carve this all up, but then you really don't really need to, because preserve, conserve, enhance, and restore the natural resources of St. Croix County in collaboration with all stakeholders is pretty broad and all-encompassing, but it's what we do and need to do. And in reading through these, you would notice that we didn't make all that many changes in the objectives. I'll just jump down to the first one and then say if you have anything about the ones from above 1.6, but preserve productive ag land through the Farmland Preservation Program. So we updated our Farmland Preservation Plan and our program. We made a lot of changes. We followed state law, but also expanded some things locally. And so that pretty much has been done, and we are working that as best we can, while also working very heavily with farmers and trying to get them to basically adopt more processes, best management practices, things like that. So,
And if I could add,
Sure.
the item about the collaboration or cooperating with the local towns kind of shows up in the zoning map. The farmland preservation has been encouraged or adopted by the towns that are in green, kind of through the center, and the other towns haven't either been interested or adopted it, or they didn't adopt it in 1982 or 1980, and we know how momentum is. It just keeps going the same way.
yeah. Any suggestions for objectives 1.1 through 1.7? I'll just jump that far. Okay. The next few, we will add a section number and page so that there'll be where there's going to be specific information on environmental corridors. But basically, we've just made a couple of minor suggestions on any of those. Okay. Going to the next page, anything else on any of that first page? I guess I'll say that first. 8.3, anything anyone has? Okay.
Could you tell me what's going on with 1.6? I'm not sure. Is that void?
Yep, we're deleting it completely.
Okay,
I'm
thank
not
you.
sure why it has a red line under it, but,
That's what confused me.
yep, but it's deleted. We are recommending it be deleted, excuse me. Next page, on the back side of this, again, we tried to update the 1.19 to relative to renewable energy. And the one thing we can do when we're reviewing or there is a new renewable energy project is we can require that they setbacks from floodplain, shoreland, so we can respect those things. And so that's what this references.
What about restoration? My understanding was that we can require restoration in these facilities when they withdraw.
Only the ones less than 100 megawatts, but over 100 megawatts, we can send a letter to the Public Service Commission and ask that they require renovation.
Is this document someplace that we need to mention that, or is that better done?
This would be fine to mention it in here, and we can add something about, yeah. We will do that. Good idea. Okay. Try to address the above and below on 100 megawatts. Let's see. Policies, groundwater quality and quantity. So right here is where we could try to incorporate anything that we haven't already addressed. The number 1.2 is new from Tim. And new technologies that improve pollutant removal efficiency. And that kind of, I guess I would say that to some extent that does address some of what you brought up, Scott. All right, 1.2, we kind of changed it a little bit. Closed depressions are a direct conduit to our groundwater, and so sort of didn't want that exemption provision there. Didn't think it was a good idea. Going down, most of the rest of them, trying to do things like rain barrels, conservation of surface water, groundwater. Hazardous waste collections are always protection of our surface and groundwaters. Promote proper well abandonment and adoption of city, village, wellhead protection ordinances. We can add educate, promote, and educate. Might have to wordsmith it a little bit, but we'll add that. Groundwater. 1.6 under groundwater. There's also regional aquifers, but we also added springs and cold water streams because the groundwater supply does heavily impact those, and that impacts trout fishing and other activities. And I think there probably is a couple more specifically about educating people on wells, and they are in that, we'll put those in. Yeah,
So we're talking a lot about groundwater. Has thought been given to the day when, and the day probably sure will come if we continue to grow, when rural water systems are going to have to be implemented, and perhaps rural effluent systems are going to have to be implemented too. I mean,
Yeah.
that may seem like it's in the distant future, but probably now is the time to start coming up with provisions for that, at least thinking of that happening.
well, the best thing that could be done then is to not have that happen at all. Which goes back to what Ryan said, but granted.
Right, but so how do you tell somebody, no, you can't be here?
You can do that by zoning for it. Zoning is a partnership with the towns, but it also can, the county could, and has chosen not to be, a little bit, they could be a little bit stronger leader in it, and basically say, we're going to look at areas, for instance, that have more sensitive land, and we're going to zone it so that it can't be used for residential development, or that the residential development has to be, say, larger lot, the rural residential, 5 acres or something. What that would do then is leave it at a density that could be, when you do suggest, I'll back up and say, the town of Hudson, which has been growing the longest of any community and has the most rural subdivisions, has looked at least twice in their history at adding, at least for part of the town, a municipal treatment system of some kind. And both times it has been cost prohibitive, where they would not tackle it. Not even for the Highway 1294 interchange, where they have a lot of commercial and industrial and other things, okay? Because the lot sizes make it very hard. And it also is very hard to redevelop. Taking a 2.5 acre lot size, or a 3 acre, or even a 1.5, and resiting it at, say, a municipal level of maybe a 1/2 acre, even just throw that idea out, and then having it be small enough so that they could then offer municipal service at a cost-effective rate, has not been feasible, to my understanding.
Yeah.
I'm not a professional, but I also would, in that area, but that's what we've been told. We also know that in our history, more than 10 years ago, there was a big push because some of our local municipalities have struggled with wastewater treatment. Definitely have been problems, which the town of, or the village of Roberts has addressed. But Hammond, Baldwin, Woodville, and they're all along the interstate corridor. Even Hudson has been very proactive in extremely proactive in keeping their existing wastewater treatment plant operating at peak capacity in order to continue to grow. But they have not been able to, even though it's been in their comprehensive plans for 20 years, find an alternative site for a secondary treatment facility. And the standards from the state, and they shouldn't be changed if we want to protect things, for surface water discharge and discharge into our various water bodies, have gotten a lot tougher, and over the years, and now they are also cost prohibitive for alternative wastewater treatment. So at one time, there was a study that was kind of started, and there is a result on a shelf in our office about a system that, a little bit the way they do in the Twin Cities, where there would be a combined wastewater system, and it would go all along the interstate corridor and probably pick up River Falls and maybe even Somerset and New Richmond. And then, that common wastewater treatment would allow density then to suddenly in the rural areas be much higher. So your rural subdivisions would now be at, say, 1/4 to 1/3. Maybe they'd be a little bit bigger because they want to be a little more rural. but they would be at a higher density. There was even discussion, and it was part of the study, to include the village of Ellsworth. It didn't get off the ground, because someone would have to take the lead and basically do it. And that would probably have to be the county. It takes, or an overriding agency with taxing authority. So that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, that was a pretty grandiose plan.
It was a very
you know,
grandiose plan.
Shipping all of the sewage from Wilson to Hudson and dumping it in the river, or whatever it was. But I was thinking more about water. You know, we've got the Junker landfill area that's fought poor water for a lot of my life.
Yes.
And it really, looking back, it would have probably made more sense to put a rural water system in than delivering bottled water to them 3 times a week. And maybe that kind of thought should be at least in the back of our minds if that happens again. And that's not over yet. But if it happens again, 3M should have paid for that. And they maybe would have if we had approached them with that.
Well, and maybe if someone with the ability to go the legal route, they maybe would have. Norlake has paid, you know. The the Junker landfill has paid. The city of New Richmond has paid. The town of Star Prairie has paid. When you think about, in case you're not aware, one of the things you'll see, and we've identified it 10 years ago and 10 years before that, we have a lot of groundwater problems in this county. We have contaminated water in numerous areas. And we have groundwater and like atrazine prohibition areas. I think we're up to 4 of those already. So we have problems. Development and growth and activity brings problems.
The city of New Richmond is supplying water in some areas of Star Prairie, correct?
Yep, they extended it out to the area of Star Prairie that's in their boundary agreement area.
Yep.
And
About a 3-acre plume of contamination from the New Richmond landfill, and the city is serviced with water, and that's been at the expense of the city. Well, the residents all are paying for their water right now, but the installation and all of that stuff was paid for by all the potential parties and that were involved in it.
So what are our options in terms of writing this into the comprehensive plan?
one of your options that we were going to float out there was the idea of just saying that there should be some kind of a study. But of course, studies cost money. But there should be some looking at that overall impacts, and it probably should be done not by county staff, but by an outside firm. So, but I don't know that there's the stomach for it. I agree with Jerry. If you do it now, it may be horribly expensive, but it'll be a lot less than it'll cost in the future when you're forced to do it. And at some point, that may happen. It happened in New Richmond. It happened at one point in Hudson, but it was a really small thing. But they forced the city of Hudson to extend water service out along Lake Malibu. There was problems along the Willow River. There's other places where the DNR has come in and forced things to happen. So you're talking pretty big, but when it comes to wastewater, failing treatment plants, water quality issues, there are lots of comments that you'll see in various surveys that talk about, boy, I wish, the Apple River was like it was when I was a kid. You gotta be pretty old to say that, but where you could fish and it was really nice and the quality was there. I mean, unfortunately, the Apple's one of the rivers that, not all of it, but a certain section of it has really been damaged. There are other areas where we've seen environmental damage here in this county. It's not, on the other hand, I take heart from the fact that 3M did an incredible amount of environmental damage over in Washington County, and most people are totally unaware of all the damage they did. So.
A system that large may take a legislative effort like a bridge over the St. Croix.
Yeah, but you're right, you should be thinking about it. You guys should tell us what you are willing to say and float to the county board.
Well, and One of the things too is we do have some data, there's actually a considerable amount of data from the New Richmond landfill contamination, because there was many wellhead testing sites that were put in, and it was telling flow values, it was telling contamination levels, and it was telling what the cleanup effort did. And even one of the things that really came out was that there was a very large agricultural well on the other side of the river that was the Apple River. So this plume, it basically came up and it ended at the Apple River, or that was what the confinement zone was. And now there was a very large agricultural well on the other side of the Apple, approximately, 200 yards. And that well drew all of the contamination, and it actually was filtering in contamination and drew it up in. So the thing is, the point I'm trying to get is, take information that we do have and see if some of the mechanics and the things that we have there might help us to identify for how this stuff works, and if there's any results we can get from that that's usable.
How much would a study cost, and are there grants available to do it?
I don't know, and I don't know, but we can find out. Whatever we thought it would cost so many years ago, it's a lot more now. And whatever, there are resources, I'm sure, through the DNR, but I don't know how much they are, so we can find out. Again, the density makes a big difference, and when you already have it carved up into a certain size lots, it's very hard to re-subdivide. I mean, our two experts can probably really speak to that.
I would poll the committee for guidance.
Yeah.
Should we ask to put together some numbers and see if we should include this in the plan, at least to kind of look at the numbers? I'm inclined to want this study, but if it's going to be millions,
Yeah. No.
I don't know.
How extensive of a study are you talking with them?
I don't know. I would like to suggest that it probably should be more along the lines of, do you want to look at the interstate corridor, like was done before? Do you want to look at the communities that back in 2008 were already identifying how they had problems with their wastewater treatment facilities, and focus on them? Or do you want to, you have some other approach? The smaller communities, Hammond, Baldwin, Woodville, have a lot less resources. The other communities, like I said, I don't know where New Richmond is at. I live in Hudson, so I follow that. But for someone from there, where they're at, we'll be putting together that information as part of our inventory that we do for the section called Utilities and Community Facilities. We put together a whole inventory of all kinds of things required under state law, and we're updating that, and that will give us some answers. And then in that section, there might be the appropriate place to have the suggestion. But it does relate really closely to natural resources and land use. And sometimes we did this before. We would go back and put it in multiple sections so that it would get addressed. A policy statement.
Can we put a policy statement in this comprehensive plan that would allow for that study without requiring it?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, to me, what makes sense would be the 90-foot corridor to Baldwin and the left half of the county.
Where you have the highest development pressure and the small municipalities, and the third one would be anybody that has high contamination levels already that we need to address to figure it out.
Which would be Town of Hudson.
Now Baldwin, by the way, is building a new sewer plant at my expense, so we should be fine
There you go.
for a
Well,
while.
there you go. Okay. And that's kind of in the middle of it, so maybe, and we know that Warren has taken care of theirs, well, they think they have, yeah.
If
But
we're
like you say,
studying,
it's that long.
if we're going to study the needs of the county, we should study everything. If we're going to pay hydrologists and engineers and who knows what to study the needs of the county, we should look at everything.
I think all the things Ellen said that they're doing now, putting all of these things together, will make that study easier. I mean, you really have to do your background work so that you can hand that off to a private company and can say, well, we've done this.
Correct, and it's also not I mean, there's nothing wrong with that cutting-edge facility that the Village of Roberts has built, because perhaps that could be a core. It doesn't necessarily have to go to Hudson, it could come from Hudson to there. You know what I believe that is the way it's done in the Twin Cities. When they hooked all their, and created the Metropolitan Sewage Commission, they hooked together a lot of facilities and basically hooked together the money to make sure that everything was kept going and helped them.
It only runs downhill though, so you've got to decide.
Well,
which
yeah, okay. You were just waiting. You were just so eager to get that one in
Paydays
there.
on Friday.
Looking for that spot. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I have not said so many jokes.
The DNR hydrologist, or
Sure.
Somebody like that could help us, give us help with some direction
Yeah,
to set us in the right way to go.
yeah.
I know we've had request upon request to put this on the agenda, and it just hasn't been feasible to even talk about because of the costs, and it's hard to avoid. At a certain point, we have to consider the whole county.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, kind of as a little bit of an aside, there's a subdivision plat in the office now in the Junker area, I believe, and they are using common wells, so each 3 or 4 houses is going to have a very large common well that's drilled pretty deep.
Yeah. And for those who didn't know, the Junker landfill and the Norlake plumes
And this,
in the town of Hudson meet, and they, in that area, there was a huge pot of money set aside for 25 years to test wells, put whole house treatment systems in, and basically continue to allow development. However, that 25 years is up this year and next, and a year ago, the DNR started testing because they assumed that by then it would have been attenuated, in other words, self-cleaned up. It has not been attenuated. It has gotten worse, and it has spread into Warren Township, and they have found another source. So they have not found the source, so it's either that has spread or there is another source in Warren. And so, but that money is gone, and they're not going to make the companies provide more money, so development in those areas will still be required to put in whole house treatment, and we're talking PCBs and all kinds of nasty stuff. So those will be at the development's expense, or the homeowner who purchases the house expense, or the business expense. So these things don't go away. They don't get attenuated like they used to. Our development is closer, there's more of it. It's not a subdivision and then 10 miles away a subdivision and 10 miles away, and so maybe it doesn't matter. It's not isolated development like it was in the 70s. It's not, it's all different, but it's been going on since the 70s, so.
Can I ask something?
Absolutely.
Is the county prohibited from entering an action against a polluter? Is that the state does that, but if the state won't, can the county take action against a polluter?
I believe that's when we can. I believe that if the county and the state do it, because that has come up with regard to animal waste spills, it's come up that if the county was to go after it, then the state would see that as, and double jeopardy is not the right word, but they would see it as a problem, and they would drop their pursuit. So we always have to stay out of it, because the state says we have, only one of us is going to exercise our jurisdiction. So they've done that. Some people wonder, why doesn't the county and the state and everybody throw the book at something? You can't.
In this instance, you're saying that new development is no longer to have the
Well, this was all happening behind the scenes with that DNR, the pot of money, and anyone who developed. And for the most part, it wasn't individuals. It was developers, like these gentlemen. And then they just, when you went to buy a house in that area, you didn't know that you paid more because these things happen in the background. But going forward, that will not be paid for. And the
Right.
ongoing testing will not happen either.
So it's incumbent upon the government, the state and county government, to protect the ground and surface water. If there's a polluter who has not fulfilled their obligation to make good on polluting ground and surface water, and the state's not holding them accountable, at that moment, the county needs to step in my opinion. And I would like to talk to corporate counsel, find out if there's something that we can do. Because a homeowner may not, I don't know about you, but I don't change the filter cartridge in my refrigerator all the time. And if they've got RO water in their house, how do we know that they're going to take the PCBs out of the water? We have an obligation to provide or protect citizens if there's polluted groundwater, surface water. We should do something as a county government. If the pollution is worse over 25 years and it's spread into another township, we shouldn't just sit back and say, oh, well.
Well, and all these
That was
people,
a good joke.
if you didn't, I didn't want to get into it this far, but all of the residents, last year there was a meeting, and this year there's going to be a meeting, I've been told, and every resident affected has been notified of what's going on. That doesn't mean that they understood it, that doesn't mean that they're proactive, but every one of them has been notified and given numbers to call at the DNR and provided opportunity to come to a meeting with the DNR. So I mean, I do know that because our county, we've been invited to be at those meetings too, our staff have and we have.
All right, we'll move this meeting along, and we'll bring that up again. It's not going
That's
to go
good,
away.
I think that's a great thing to talk about, so. Okay, and we are going to add anything related to our groundwater study that needs to be in here, so, yeah. Surface and wetlands, waters and wetlands, again, we didn't have, I'm sure I'm through the report here, have a lot of changes to that. I think up here, I got mixed up. Got an extra page in there. So, we actually, the 2.5 change that we made is something that we put into our ordinances quite a few years ago. But since 2012, or maybe we were clarifying, we did, already did, 2.10 has already been done. We edited 2.11 because we thought it should be broader, and the St. Croix Basin Water Resources Planning Team is like a real specific subgroup, so we thought it should just be broader. We also wanted to bring in the new concept, assist municipalities with adaptive management programs for surface water goals. We've talked with a couple different communities in the county more than once about that, and so far nothing's really happened, but we are available to assist if they would like to pursue it. Adaptive management is basically to try to reduce your phosphorus or other nitrates or other problems the municipality would provide money that would then be used with farmers upstream, and then that would reduce the contaminants, the surface water contaminants, so that the municipality was more likely to meet the DNR's surface water management goals for surface water discharge or groundwater discharge. As a real brief summary of that. It's a big program that, yeah.
Nourishment's hired a consultant.
Again, second time, okay. Well, that's their decision. I think that I have other opinions, but I won't say them. Yep. And partnering with and supporting all the lake districts in the implementation of the lake management plans, that's another really good one to do. Any other thoughts on the surface water and wetlands? Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry, I always got stuff put on. The one thing that I somewhat have some concerns is that under the new best management practices and stuff, all, when you have any new developments that go in, the stormwater has to be managed within the property boundaries. You can't allow sheet runoff from one property to another and those types of things. But one of the things that coming from a town board for many years that I've seen a lot of times was issues such as people that decide that stormwater pond in the grate in their backyard was a great place for a walkout basement, and then trying to understand why all of a sudden the spring thaw comes and they've got a wet basement. How do we that's a for instance, but the other issue becomes what typically, and I'm not sure how our regulations currently are, but what typically has been in the past is that we've allowed that the stormwater management for a particular development had to be maintained by a homeowners association that was organized and done through the development. And although the developer will hire an attorney and draft up a bunch of language and have this agreement that's in place, more times than not, nothing is ever done to maintain it, and they become sediment filled and other issues become. And the other thing is how they're identified and the problem they end up with. People I've seen where they've built sheds in the stormwater basin because it's on their property line, and they
Scott, is
fail
your
to see
question
it.
regarding enforcement?
How do we look at that? How have we identified this, and is this something that we can look at in our plan to try to alleviate some of these issues?
Well, you and I have talked about these three issues many times, so I'm very well aware of them. And we are updating our subdivision ordinance. It's not going as fast as we planned, but we are updating it. And we know that we have 2 or 3 ideas that you and I have talked about to address them in the subdivision ordinance. And one of them is to put the building pads, require that they be identified and built, and that they have to follow them. They can't, unless they come in and do a stormwater study, they can't vary from the building pads. Another is that we require right now that the stormwater management, what they have to do is actually filed against those particular lots. So we do that. I don't know if that's still going to get the property owners actually doing anything, but we can only take so many steps. We do not have the staff to be out there checking. We did do some of that in the past. We could, our new consultants have worked out extremely well with reviewing stormwater, and we could look at expanding that. But we do have, for instance, one town that contracts with us, and periodically, every 5 to 6 years, we do have gone in the past, gone out and checked their stormwater ponds. Town of Hudson does. And that's because they've had a lot of the problems you just talked about. So other towns could contract with us, and we could do that. And if they contract, then there's a possibility we'd have enough money to do that.
Yeah, we do an inspection and then provide them a report, and they take the report back. And if they have an active homeowners association with chainsaws and big mowers, and like to do outside work, they do it themselves. If they don't, they have contracted with somebody, then we do a follow-up inspection and bill the municipality for our time, and then the municipality can put it on their special assessment.
Right. But those building pads are, they wouldn't be 100% mandatory. We'd be like, yeah, if you come back in and we go through it and you pay for it, you could move it. But the building pads, if they're forced to build on the building pads, then that would solve it. The tricky part is, and I don't want to get into the weeds, but when we have, which is a lot of it right now, that the developers are keeping more control. They develop it, they build all the houses, they sell them. But there are older lots, and we have many, many older lots, where an individual comes in and just looks at it and says, well, this is where I want to be, and they won't have building pads, it won't be on the plat, and that's where we have the problems. So coming up with ideas for those many older building lots could be a problem. And builders, when you do a whole major, all that kind of gets figured out when in terms of walkouts and everything, whereas a 3 or 4 lot CSM done with a surveyor or an engineer and mom and pop, that's where we have the problems and it's harder. But we can require building pads on the plat and say they have to follow them, and when they don't, it still becomes an enforcement problem. So if you guys have some additional ideas for the small ones, we'd love to hear them. So get your wheels turning and come back next month. But anyway, those are, I'm very well aware of all those issues. I recently had a conversation with one of our newer staff who said, no, you can never do that. That can't. And I said, yes, we can, and yes, we will. He said, oh, that won't go over. And I said, actually, it has to, because this is a real problem. So anyway, but it's good of you to bring it up, and thank you for the rest of the group. Sorry. No, because otherwise you'd think it was just me, and it's not. Go ahead, yeah.
What is the real possibility or the taste from villages or municipalities about hiring the county to inspect those things? Like, how, if we were to do that and say, we're gonna create a position funded by that, how many people would buy off on that, do you think?
I think there are towns that would. I don't know if it'd be enough to pay for the position, but it's a great idea. And to some extent, I hate to keep putting it on developers, it gets passed on. But some of the towns will talk about how they just have no extra money. None. But at the same time, can they afford not to? And the enforcement activity that we go through is so time-consuming. It'd be much better to be proactive than reactive. Dan, you have a thought?
Yeah, what if we put an environmental fee, part of it put on the builder, part of it put on the township, and that's what we use to fund a position. And now I'm just thinking out loud for anybody, share the thought on that.
I'd have to think about how we could do that. We can't really charge townships without, you're kind of saying just, yeah, they'd have to agree to it. I don't think we could force them to pay a town. Is that kind of what you meant, or do you mean something else and we misunderstood you?
Well, we'd ask them to agree because it would be to their advantage to.
Yeah?
It would be their advantage that we're going to be doing better. We would be doing better enforcement if you agree to this. This is to your advantage. They're always asking for better enforcement, better enforcement, better enforcement. So we get an environmental fee.
Yeah, and the first people that get the calls and the complaints are the town chairs. And so that's always good, but they come to us real quick right after that.
So this is an idea that doesn't necessarily fit this conversation, but it would have to be put into the comprehensive plan. It would be an environmental fee. We have to figure out how it happens. It would fund a position so that we have one more inspector. The inspector would be specifically for environmental issues. Stormwater runoff would be a big one.
And it could even be tied to the work we're already doing with our water quality specialist. It could be tied to that if we found ways to free that person up from other things.
And I'm thinking specifically about not just new construction, but new construction, about subdivisions, about complaints. You know, you get a pile of old cars, we don't know if they're leaking, let's get out there, we got an environmental specialist and go out and take a look at that. Water quality issues, an environmental specialist could be talking about. Someplace in here, I think we need to add a noise ordinance. We have never had a noise ordinance.
We don't have the authority. Counties can't. That has to be a city, village, or town.
That's state law.
We can double check it, but yeah, there's certain things prohibited from counties from doing.
We'll have to double check it, because the more entertainment gets put, and this is something that came up with this thing
Okay.
last week, we're gonna talk about that again, but with no noise ordinance, we have a whole big gaping hole of conversation that we can't address, and I would like to know for sure that we can't have a noise ordinance. If we can't have a noise ordinance, then we have really, that was the can of worms. That was the big elephant in the room the other day.
Noise is a nuisance, and the nuisance law, to my recollection, is limited to cities, villages, and towns to regulate. Because all the nuisances, noise, odor, you know, all those kind of things. The state didn't anticipate that when they wrote some of the regulations, that counties would see something that needed to be a county-wide regulation, if you think about it that way. It's a big, even that, I don't know that that's a practical thing to regulate county-wide. Anyway,
Just one.
yep, go ahead.
Back to the funding issue for if we're doing inspections. I know that, I'm pretty certain that the city of New Richmond, and I know the city of Amory has, where there's a part on their utility bills that actually goes for funding stormwater management. There's a certain fee they pay. Amory, it's quarterly. I think in Richmond, it's on a monthly utility bill. But if there's is there another mechanism that may be there? I know, like the Lakes District type deal, where there's people that are involved in this. I don't know what the mechanisms are, what the state would allow, but if there's other mechanisms that might be there that could make this feasible, so if you're asking a town or village with their budgets the way they are to pull something out of transportation to put into this new person, you'd probably have a really difficult time of it, but if there's another mechanism to fund it that might work for them, and it was explained to them, well, we went about it this way, and then it may contribute to making something like this happen.
They maybe would increase their building permit a little bit. That might be an option. We have at the county level talked for 20 years about the idea of, and it goes back to, we brought it up again last year when you guys were talking about us having a permitting system that would permit everything and that people could see online. And one of the ideas that we felt would be a good idea to nip a lot of problems in the bud would be, we do not issue building permits. And that really, for staff who have come from places where they were part of the team that issued building permits, it really can hamper the ability. So we've talked about a nominal fee, $50, that would require everybody who does just about anything in the county has to come to the county, especially if they could do it online, didn't actually have to drive to Hudson, and have a small fee so that we could then quickly look in our electronic systems, is there a problem? We can check, hey, it looks like you might have a problem based on what you're telling me with setbacks, with steep slopes, with water quality. Hey, there is a water body there. Well, no, there isn't. Well, there's a wetland. You have to, okay, you didn't realize it was, but Mr. Homeowner, but we do know, don't build that shed on that wetland. Things like that we could pick it up really quickly on our system. And that nominal fee could be used for environmental, because when you think about everything that happens in this county, it would add up. But we really can't do it unless we also have a permitting system, because it's just would be way too staff intensive. So we've never really even brought it up to a committee, because it's just would take too much staff time.
We've talked about an electronic permit tracking system
Yep.
frequently, and now would this be part of that?
That would be the way that we could implement it, and we brought it up because we thought, well, how could that pay for an electronic tracking system?
Well-
But it might also be able to help pay for, like an environmental fee for a specific staff person dedicated to do specific things. It might. So we'll look into all that a little bit more. And we have not stopped looking at permitting tracking systems. In fact, we have a couple of really good options that we're finalizing. And we may have a much more, we may have a real solution. Yep, we didn't stop just because initial options didn't work out. Yeah, so, yeah, Jerry, you have something. Oh, sorry. If we need to, I know we have another item, and it depends on how late you guys want to go. I'd like to finish the natural resources section, but if we do need to postpone the ag section, we could do that.
Can I go back to 1.4, please? The
Yeah,
household and agricultural hazardous waste. Given that recycling did so well in the survey, enormously popular in the survey, could we emphasize this a little bit more? I'm not saying that we're going to have the money immediately to do more recycling, but I'd like to provide for it in the comprehensive plan.
well, simple thing would be is to try to go, we could even say to try to stay at 2 collections a year.
That's too specific.
Okay.
I'd
We
like,
can look at something to say it stronger. Okay,
right,
And I do know
make a
there
stronger
was-
statement,
okay.
and a non-limiting stronger statement, so that, because people want recycling. I,
And it didn't rank as high as we'd like in the surveys, but I would suspect that goes straight back to the fact that we've had to drop due to cost, from 2 to 1 hazardous waste collection. I think that's a big factor in that. Anyway, that's just, I forget where I was. I'm sorry.
Shoreline and stream bank.
Thank you. Shoreline and stream bank. So, again, 3.1 has already been taken care of, so we deleted it. A couple of specific suggested changes in 3.2, just to make it clearer. The other ones, no changes, down to 3.6. There again, that was the St. Croix River crossing, and so we deleted the second half, but kept the first part, because there is a St. Croix Riverway master plan, which is good, and we have an overlay, the St. Croix River Overlay District, so we continue to manage that. Any suggestions or comments on that section, stream bank? Okay, turn to the next page, natural communities, open space, environmental corridors. Again, talking about a lot of education and support for various organizations and activities out there that help keep open space in our communities and help try to protect our natural habitats and wildlife, that kind of thing. We did maybe want to edit 4.6 again. We had provide incentives, changed it to just promote and support, but again, based on what you've said, we could change transfer of development rights. We would suggest continuing to promote conservation design, but instead of support, we'll look for a different word and we did add the word municipal, so perhaps we should add that also in the other section, so it was not us, but them. And we'll look for a different word from support. Accommodate or something like that. 4.8, again, conservation design standards. We talked about this one quite a bit. Conservation design didn't go in real well. We weren't able to get it used a lot. We did write all the standards. They do exist. And it was really trying to focus on those primary and secondary environmental corridors versus why do that conservation design on an area that's former farm fields or, nothing that sensitive there. So we think that's still valuable. I forget, Brett, what your comment was on it.
I don't
remember
recall
either.
either,
Okay.
but it was a
We didn't make
comment,
any
not an edit.
changes.
It wasn't any changes. I think
Okay.
it was just, are we going to continue to do this? Because, well, the word should, it's not shall.
It's not shall, it's just
So
should.
It's
It's
not as strong
strongly
as shall.
encouraging, so, it's promoting. Number 411, county, state, federal agencies educate regarding disease to human and animal health. We took off all the specific ones because they've all changed, chronic wasting disease is still out there, but there's all kinds of other things out there now. And so we just thought, let's not be that specific. Any other changes to the natural resource communities, open space, and environmental corridors? Otherwise, I'll jump the next two together. Wildlife habitat and nature-based recreation, and also non-metallic mining. Basically, these statements, nature-based recreation, that we thought we'd use a little more, maybe appropriate terminology, local recreation and tourism, rather than, because that's usually what we think of when we think of nature-based recreation. Develop county-owned properties, which we would hope to do at some point. Non-metallic mining, we did strike 6.2, and it goes on to the next page. Okay, and also struck all that detail underneath of it, you know.
So are we eliminating 6.2?
Yep, that's what we're recommending, because analyzing that is not really something that we have how much the ability to do. I'm not sure who suggested that back when, but
They took away a lot of our right to,
yes.
so that's where they probably went.
Yep. And then 6.4, consider dust control measures for large non-metallic mining sites with high production. We don't need to put that, consider it, because we already have that in the regulations. We've added that. And then the last change under renewable energy, we had encouraged them on a small scale, and we just had, related to what you said, Dan, only will be more specific, but evaluate the large-scale ones for impacts to surface and groundwater, because that's something we're allowed to do, floodplain, shoreland. And maybe we can also add a little bit there about encouraging the restoration when they are done. Okay? So that ends our natural resources section. We're at 6:46. I know we have another agenda item. I don't know. Yep.
Why don't we
Take a little short break, maybe just 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and then come back to the other agenda item, and farmland we'll maybe ask at the end for another work session. You guys are probably going to ask for different food, but you know. Yep, let me just switch gears a minute here. So John is handing out a little background piece he put together for agenda item number 2, which is discuss authority and standards in the Ag 2 zoning district. So,
I think this was probably a spin-off from our public hearing last week. So even though we can't talk specifically about that application tonight, I think the background that was asked to be put together tonight was kind of requested in that context. And so if I can just go through everything, it's just the one page. Everything behind it is just some of the supplemental information. I think the committee was asking last week about, hey, what's permitted and what's not in Ag 2 versus R2. That's what Exhibit A is. And then Exhibit B gets into more of some of the details for our ag entertainment standards. But I summarize all of that in the first page. So I'm just going to walk through that. It'll take me 3-4 minutes, and then we can open it up for questions. So basically in St. Croix County, when it comes to Ag 2 zoning, we have 2 zoning districts. We have the Ag 1 and Ag 2. So on the zoning map on the table, and I think Brett covered it earlier, but all the properties you see in green are zoned Ag 1. Everything in blue is zoned Ag 2. Both of those districts meet the criteria for being certified as farmland preservation plan districts under state statute. And in order to have those districts, we have to have a farmland preservation plan document along with a farmland preservation plan map. So as part of my presentation last week, one of the long-range planning documents I referred to as our farmland preservation plan, which is a smaller map. And on this map, you see parcels that are highlighted in green. And so the county with the Soil Conservation Service established a point system for whether or not these properties could be certified as farmland preservation. So it dealt with soil types. There was a land evaluation part of it that dealt with soil types, erodibility, steep slopes. And then the second part of it was called site assessment, and that goes to whether or not towns have policies that support agriculture uses. And so you'll notice on the very west part of the county, the towns of St. Joe, Richmond, Hudson do not really have many properties that qualify for that. And the reason why is because their town plan documents don't really support large-scale agriculture. So by virtue of that, they didn't score enough points to get on the map. But nonetheless, we have an objective criteria that were established. It was approved by the state. And so we have properties that do qualify for an ag zoning district. As you can see by the zoning map, not all of them are agricultural. Some of the towns away on the east side, Glenwood, Springfield, Emerald, would qualify, but the towns chose not to take an active role. And so by an active role, I mean they didn't certify themselves as a town, which would qualify their landowners for state tax credits. So the main ones that are qualified for that would be Stanton and Ceylon on the zoning map. On the northern tier towns, the town of Aaron Prairie, Baldwin, and then Pleasant Valley and Rush River. So even though Kinnikinnick does not have many properties zoned agricultural that you see on their map, there are some properties in their town that still qualify for that. And so the application last week, because the property that was being discussed did qualify for an ag zoning, that was part of our presentation to you, that it did meet the scoring criteria, and so that was one document that we referred to in our presentation. And so from that standpoint, that request was consistent with the farmland preservation plan. Now, these Ag 1 and Ag 2 districts that you see, before we could put them into effect, they had to be approved by the state. So the Department of Ag, Transportation, and Consumer Protection had to approve those zoning districts. And under number 4, you'll see that under statutes, it's required that we allow as a permitted or conditional use, ag uses, and then I underline to emphasize, accessory uses which include an activity or business that is an integral part of an ag use, or a business, whether or not it's associated with an ag use, that is conducted by the owner of the farm and employs no more than 4 full-time employees. And then we have other uses that are allowed. But as you can see, there's that commercial, the ag commercial component that by law we have to include in our ag districts. So somebody might ask the question, why is ag entertainment allowed in our Ag 1 and Ag 2 districts? That's because it's required under the state certified program. Next, I'll go down to number 5, some of the Ag 2 requirements. To promote agriculture, we limit our residential development in those areas. So anything that's zoned green on the zoning map, Ag 1, you're allowed residential development at 1 unit per 40 acres. That's it. No major subdivisions are allowed. Under Ag 2, it's 2 units per 40 acres or 1 per 20. And those dwelling units have to be on a minimum parcel size of 3 acres. And again, I mentioned no major subdivisions allowed, only minor subdivisions under 5C, which allow only 4 lots every 5 years. And then under number 6, we just have ag entertainment and farm exhibition standards. These standards have been in place since 2012. So what you were looking at the other night as part of your public hearing, those standards were adopted in 2012. We did not change them in 2019 with our comprehensive revision. So they've been in place for about 11 years. And real quickly, under 6A through D, in the Ag 1 and Ag 2 districts, we covered this last week at the hearing, but ag entertainment is allowed as a permitted use by right if it does not exceed 15 events per year. And that came up last week at our discussion. If the applicant made a choice to go over that, over the 15 events per year, he would be required to go to the Board of Adjustment for a conditional use permit, at which point appropriate conditions could be placed on that permit. So the threshold, as you can see, in 2012, that threshold was established at 15 events. That was kind of the point where the county made a determination that if it's over 15 events per year, yes, we think that could have enough impacts that would warrant a conditional use permit. Anything under 15 was allowed by right. And then as we touched on last week under letter C, doesn't matter if it's a permitted or conditional use, they have to have an event plan. If it exceeds 100 people at any event, they would just need to provide more detailed information on parking, days and hours, ingress, egress, how they're going to deal with sanitation and things of that nature. And then that plan would have to be filed with the clerk, fire department, emergency medical provider, so that information would be on file. Who would need to see that? And then real quickly, we did have time from yesterday when we got the request. We did a quick research as far as what our abutting counties do. And you'll see Pierce County to our south, they define commercial ag as ag tourism. And they're allowed in 4 different zoning districts in the county, which covers about their eastern half of the county. You can see the 4 different zoning districts there. And regardless of the size of the facility or how many events they're going to do, they just flat out require a conditional use permit. It just goes right to their Board of Adjustment. Polk County to our north, they do not participate in FPP zoning, so we didn't have anything to report there. And then Dunn County to our east, they call it ag entertainment as well. It's allowed in 1 zoning district, and that's by a special exception permit, which is equivalent to a conditional use permit. They just call it something else. And in Dunn County as well, it doesn't matter the number of events or how big, it's an automatic conditional use application with our Board of Adjustment. So just to give you a flavor of what's going on in some of our adjacent counties. And then as I mentioned earlier, I have the attachments. It's our entire use table. Again, it's just to show you what we allow in the Ag 2 compared to the R2. And then the exhibit B is just our detailed ordinance on the ag entertainment standards that I just kind of abbreviated for you. So that is pretty much a quick summary of what the Ag 2 is, what it does, how it was created, you know, and how it functions in St. Croix County.
And one thing I wanted to just, I know some of you already know this, but I just think it's worth saying on the record for the purposes of anyone who watches this later or at any point, is that any changes to the Ag 2 zoning district would not impact any current applications, any current operations that are already out there. So they would continue to operate under their existing permit, whether it was conditional or just permitted. So just so you know that.
And I will be covering some of this at the June 15th CDC meeting at the committee's request as well, so.
That's clear. This is a good explanation, though, and I appreciate this. And we'll take this up. This is by request. Jerry wanted to understand how this works. And you weren't part of this conversation, like, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago when we had another work session. I remember Ed was there, so I know it was a long time ago, when we actually made the decision to how we were going to do this. And so for your benefit, and I'm glad that we had this conversation. So I'm not sure when and how we'll take this up, but it's, I think it's very instructive, and I appreciate you taking the time to do it. So it's getting late. When are we going to meet again?
Let me ask if there's any, real quick, are there any questions from any others in this group about what John just went over? Anything you want clarified?
No, but I think we should address this sooner rather than later, because this seems to be kind of a blight that's happening, and I think we have to.
So just for the committee's benefit, you know, I work with people on rezoning applications, and I would guess that for every rezoning that makes it to an application, there's 4 or 5 that don't. They just don't either meet the farmland preservation designation, and that's the primary reason. So yeah, a lot of people look into it, but they never get to the point of getting an application submitted.
And we did talk about, as staff, in theory, what if this was a conditional use permit instead of just a permitted use? We are not sure that, and we can look into that, but we're not sure that a conditional use permit could basically limit the extent of the agritourism. Like, could it say you can have wine tastings, and you can have petting zoo, but you can't have weddings or events? We're not sure that if you have thorough read of the state law would be needed to see it, because the state law specifically calls out events on farms. So I'm not sure we could do something like that. Just wanted you to be aware of that.
I think one of the stumbling blocks here is when it's 15 calendar days per year. I think that number 15 is a large number that we have to reconsider. Again, someone brought that up at our meeting, last meeting, where that's every weekend plus 2 of the month of 3 months. And that's a lot, really. That's almost a full-time, nonstop party.
Yep.
That works some places, but not all over.
And because of the time constraint, I did not really have time to talk to the staff at these other counties, but I've read in other states that some have the ability to address noise attenuation. So we heard comments about noise, which seemed to be the big concern, but I've seen sample ordinances again from other states. That doesn't mean we'd be allowed to do it, but you know, are there conditions that are attached that deal with noise attenuation, insulating the inside of the building, having the musical events to be inside, not prohibiting them, but keeping them to within a structure. So I'm not sure how much flexibility we have until we do more research, but I mean, that's, yeah.
The one issue that I think we saw more than anything was that, yes, it's permitted on our farmland preservation to be ag, but when it's surrounded by R1, that's where it makes the biggest issue, I think. Because you have those 1.5 acre lots that are
Yeah.
right there.
Yep.
Rather than if you have agriculture all around you and say you're taking a corner of a lot on one of our county highways and going ag 2 makes totally different sense than a situation that we have.
Yep. And we,
And, go ahead.
and the challenge is each town has their own comprehensive plan, so they kind of craft their vision. And we, quite frankly, have towns that have dual policies. While they kind of welcome the development, they still like the ag alternatives, and that's where the city meets country. And that's where we have some of those conflicts.
Yeah, a lot of towns felt when they wrote their comp plans that while they want to become more suburban, I don't know if that's the right term, but a term, they also have a lot of existing ag. And they didn't want to suggest to their existing ag that it shouldn't continue. They just didn't want to suggest that they should make large investments and plan on being there another 100 years. That, to use really broad terms. The town of Richmond and Kinnickinnick are great examples of that. Well, we're on the cusp. Well, we got a lot of ag. Well, we like to, kind of be a little bit of both worlds. So they wrote comp plan standards that are both worlds. Frankly, from our point of view, rather than, not to say you can't change the rules, I understand. I heard that, and I thought that statement the other night was a good, very strong and interesting statement about the 15 times plus 2. And, but just deciding that it's incompatible with surrounding land uses and things like that, and giving that at another meeting, not tonight, or anything else, as direction to staff to develop legally defensible justification and just not rezoning it is a better approach than trying to regulate them to death. Okay? I just would be honest about that. So. And I think one other thing you should understand too is that the purpose of the state statute, making it so broad, is to support agriculture in the state, broadly, very broadly. And so that's why it's allowed in our ag districts. And could they do it in other places? Could you have ag entertainment? Absolutely. You just got to zone it commercial. That's why we have a district that, I forget which one it is, I always get it. C3, thank you. Two. See, we always get it mixed up. Anyway, we have a commercial district that is really focused on those isolated rural type things. So, and I shouldn't say isolated because it's supposed to be a certain look, but that is why, and those districts were written with that in mind, but not to allow it to intermix with residential. So that is a really valid reason if that's why you guys end up going, and you don't have to tell us now because it's not really on the agenda. So.
Yeah, that's
Anything about that?
then we start to go into that conversation and we start doing it as if it's a what if, but we know what if means, and I don't want to blend over into that. So let's not blur that line. Next meeting?
Yeah, are you specific, our regular next meeting, of course, is June 15th. Thank you, Julie. But for another work session, we could work on maybe by then we can try to we can put it off a little bit, finish up the agriculture, talk about because you've given us a lot to do, talk about the transportation with the highway commissioner for sure, and perhaps the highway committee, will see how he wants to move forward. And then we could also bring you back at that meeting, perhaps with a more in-depth discussion of conservation design, since that seems to be. But again, we don't want to get into actual ordinance changes, 'cause that's not the level we should be at. Sorry, Scott. But anyway, we could do that if you wanted to wait a little bit, or if you want to knock out this ag section and get a few short-term answers, we can make it sooner. You guys kind of tell us, do you want it in like a month? And then let's look at calendars.
What's realistic for them, they are also, this is the busy time of year too, with everything else going on.
Maybe this is vacation time
Yes, sir.
For most people.
For you guys too, not just for me.
Absolutely.
Development is crazy this time of year.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Yes.
So maybe it should be sooner rather than later.
And a short meeting, would you rather just do short little meetings and not as much time?
If you have it on a rainy night?
I can sure try. You just tell me exactly which night you want it, and you got it.
Do you prefer it on an evening, Ellen?
Generally speaking, I believe that our, Sean and Ryan prefer it on an evening
Okay.
because of their work commitments. So we've tried to accommodate that.
So what do you think of Tuesday, June 13?
And then a regular meeting on the 15th? Is that what you're
Yeah, real close together.
The board meeting is, the boardroom is available for the 13th, if you want that.
Do you think we can get some materials together by then?
Or the 20th?
I guess the question is,
I don't think we'd get to Transportation Committee. So
That
we
was-
just want a short one on ag, and
We'll be meeting with Robbie in the next week or two.
we are, okay.
I think it would be more preferential to me that we get through ag and transportation together.
Okay,
So if we have to push that off into July, then
Then I'd rather wait till the July. I've got a vacation myself that last week of June that I don't want to, I can't be here the last week of June.
But to the lower part of July, maybe after the 17th, because I have a vacation plan before then. That I can't change, it's not just me, that's.
okay, well,
Okay, so you do have a meeting already scheduled for Monday, July 17th, because we moved it from the 20th due to the county fair to the 17th, so.
That's when I will be there for, yeah.
yeah.
how about the week after?
24th? Week of the 24th?
Tuesday the 25th?
We could do it any night that week, but I will tell you that there is a Center for Land Use Education through UW Stevens Point class for all of you to attend if you'd like, from 6 to 8 p.m. in Amory, the evening of Wednesday, the 26th.
What if we kind of go back and try to have a shorter meeting to get through these two sections? If John thinks he's going to meet with Robbie soon,
I would say within a week or two, we will be meeting with Robbie.
what about looking at an evening meeting was it the first week of June you're going to be gone, Dan?
It's the last week of June.
Okay. Is there any availability the first full week of June? Because we're pushing that one back pretty darn far.
6th or 7th, or not 6th, the 6th or.
But if we're going to do both ag and transportation,
Robbie we need a little bit more time than that, I think.
A little more? Okay, and then the third week of June, we're already at our committee meeting on the Thursday, the 15th. So, and we,
what do we say about June 20th?
How about the 20th, 21st, 22nd, something like that?
22nd I can't.
The, there's a
not till
administration
Thursday.
committee meeting on the evening of the 20th in this room, and then there's HHS the evening of the 21st.
Right.
So they're out.
We can meet in 12/16 though. If we,
Not if it bid.
oh, that's right.
Yeah.
June 22nd, was that one thrown out there?
That's an option. That room is available.
I have
Conflict?
Oh, that's the one you had conflict.
the county executive from Washington County is coming. I'm entertaining him.
What about the week of July 10th?
How about the week of June the 25th? The last week?
No, Dan's gone that week.
Well, that, all week you're gone that night?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're leaving on the 24th.
Well, how about the 19th, Julie? Monday, the 19th?
What?
June.
Go back in the month, no.
It's just the end of July is almost 2 full months away. Actually,
Monday,
it is
June
2 full
19th?
months away. Yeah,
19th
Y'all
is
can
the
do
first.
without me. Go right ahead. I won't be here.
that's okay.
I'll be in Nashville just for that day. I mean, the weekend and that day.
Sounds like fun.
How about the 20th?
I think the 19th we could do.
The
20th
19th, we
had-
can do the 20th, there's a conflict in the room.
Okay, that's right.
The 21st, there's a conflict in the room, and the 22nd, Dan has a
Okay,
conflict, so.
19th?
19th, does that work for everyone? June
Work for you?
19th, Monday.
Okay,
Yeah.
June 19th, 5 PM. Ag, transportation, and maybe a few answers, but that'll be it. or maybe that'll be it.
Are you going to invite Robbie to come to that meeting for the transportation then, or?
We can?
Or
We
just
as staff
wait?
are gonna meet with Robbie to see what, if any, other topics need to be in the plan, and then have him do a quick review of his comments relating to transportation, and then we'll be able to forward those to you on the 19th.
Well, we have a transportation committee the morning of the 19th.
Oh, well, he's more than welcome to take anything he wants to them and have one of us there if he'd like.
So that, maybe you may want to contact him and see if that's what he wanted.
Yep, I reached out to him, hopefully he'll get back to me tomorrow, so.
Yeah, okay, that's, I just thought I'd bring that up because I'm on that committee too.
Okay, that would work really well.
That's at 8 in the morning, 8:30 in the morning.
Okay. I think that'll work. It's just if you leave it go too long, then suddenly you've got all this stuff and you forgot what we were doing.
Julie, would you put out a memo with all the dates of all the little things that we just talked about, because 2 of them surprised me.
Yes.
Any other news for the benefit of the committee from anybody?
No. And don't forget, if you want to go to any of those, I think we have handouts over there, any of those activities, just let us know and we'll pay for your registration.
All right, anybody object if I adjourn the meeting?
Oh, please do.
Great, I adjourn the meeting. Have a nice evening.